As Satoru Iwata observed himself, people often say that Nintendo and Apple share much in common, perhaps with both companies having experienced the tragic premature deaths of visionary leaders before going from strength to strength financially in the recent period. These comparisons have only become more persuasive over time. And for Nintendo, on the surface, those comparisons might seem rather flattering. Apple is a hugely successful mega corporation, reliably up there as one of the biggest companies in the world, the first company to surpass $3 trillion in market value, and yet, alongside this, has managed to maintain strong brand loyalty. It strikes me that there is every temptation to embrace and follow the Apple model. However, I'm not so sure, and in fact, while the lessons of Apple provide huge opportunities for Nintendo to consolidate and develop into an ever more powerful position, they also come with a tremendous amount of risk. So, first let's look at the areas of alignment between the two companies despite their geographical and linguistic differences. In terms of company mythology, both have strong regional ties. Nintendo is famously a Kyoto company, and even within Japan, Kyoto has its own traditions and culture, particularly of craftsmanship and passing down wisdom intergenerationally. Philosophically, Nintendo tries to surprise and delight, whereas Apple's company motto exhorts its teams to think different. Apple, on the other hand, is explicitly not just an American company, but a Californian company, something that they have only doubled down on in recent years with, for example, operating system revisions branded on geographical features close to their California offices. While Apple was a 1976 startup and Nintendo is a Japanese corporation with roots back to the 19th century, both made significant and disruptive impacts in the field of technology through the 1980s, and both had fairly bumpy rides along the way. In the case of Nintendo, leadership has been extremely consistent over the years, with Hiroshi Yamauchi shepherding the company from 1951 through to his retirement in 2002, an astonishing more than half-century stretch before handing over to Satoru Iwata. In the case of Apple, Steve Jobs bootstrapped the company but spent heavily on untested products and was ousted in 1985, only being reinstated in 1997. Both visionary leaders, Jobs and Iwata, died prematurely around the inception of products that would utterly transform their company's prospects, the iPhone and iPad, and the Nintendo Switch. But the companies had a long track record of hugely disruptive and revolutionary product launches that utterly changed the way people engaged with their respective industries. The 1984 Apple Macintosh was the first mass-market personal computer to feature an integral graphical user interface and a mouse, while Nintendo also had progressively innovated on user interfaces, from the D-pad on the Game & Watch to analog triggers to integrating motion controls and touchscreen technology in their games. Nonetheless, both are now under the direction of leaders whose origins are not in product development. Tim Cook and Shuntaro Furukawa are interesting to compare in this sense. Furukawa is very much a company man. After leaving Waseda University's School of Political Science and Economics in 1994, he joined Nintendo as an accountant at the European offices for more than 10 years and has spent a huge amount of time across the company, including as an outside director of the Pokemon Company representing Nintendo's interests. It seems clear that he was being groomed for a senior role for a considerable period, with former employees Kit and Krista observing that often when Satoru Iwata would visit the American offices, they would find Mr. Furukawa coming along as well, and they have observed recently that Nintendo is very keen on succession planning. In truth, Furukawa's final rise was relatively abrupt. In 2015, he became the general manager of the corporate planning department, joined the Nintendo board of directors in 2016 as the managing executive officer of the corporate analysis and administration division, and finally in 2018, he became the company president. Notably, these latter moves were at or after the time when Satoru Iwata passed away, and suggests that his succession was at least somewhat expedited. In 2015, after over a century in business, Nintendo had only had 4 presidents, and the previous one was in office for the better part of a century, so it's small wonder that when the company faced the abrupt passing of such a hugely influential figure as Satoru Iwata, they had difficulty adapting. Still, for Apple, the passing of Steve Jobs might be said to be even more existential, as Jobs was the founder and centre of much of the mythology of the company. Having been ousted from the company in 1985, Jobs naturally wanted to find someone more loyal and trustworthy as his hand-picked heir and successor, and Tim Cook fit the bill perfectly. Cook was from a working-class family, the son of a US Army veteran and shipyard worker father, and a mother who was a technician at a pharmacy. He was not an Apple native by any means, having had a 12-year stint at IBM, a period as the chief operating officer at Wholesaler Intelligent Electronics, and a short stint at Compaq before being recruited by Apple in 1997, around the time Jobs returned to Apple. Cook was unlikely to conflict with Jobs in any way, but he also brought significant strengths of his own. In particular, he made efficient manufacturing a top priority, something that only continued after the loss of Steve Jobs, and those similarities are ones we will now explore. He might not have been aligned with the company over the long term, but he had 3 interim leadership stints in 2004, 2009 and 2011 before finally taking over from Steve Jobs, ensuring that there was a consistency of vision at Apple. However, perhaps the most significant cultural alignment between Apple and Nintendo is that they are both explicitly hardware-software companies. That is to say that while many companies specialize in one area or another, Nintendo and Apple maintain integrated ecosystems which provide quite a few advantages, including maintaining quite a closed ecosystem. Sometimes this has been to Nintendo's detriment, as with the difficulty for many third parties of developing for consoles such as the Wii U, but generally this biases consumers towards supporting first-party software lines which are designed to make maximally efficient use of the hardware and indeed are often developed synchronously with it. This kind of thing only works if you're successful, but since Nintendo and Apple have both achieved success, they are able to largely disregard external concerns. However, while both have a history of excellence and innovation, the gravitational pull of both companies is away from this. Breakthrough technology often loses money. Even Nintendo, who like to ensure they make good margins on their hardware, took a loss early on when selling the Wii U and 3DS hardware, and of course they have many failures to their name, from the Virtual Boy to the 64DD. Nintendo throws a lot of things at the wall, and they don't all stick. Conversely, Apple is highly reliant on a legacy product line. Sure, they've announced the iPad and the iWatch in recent years, but essentially these are pieces of technology that repurpose the form factor of the iPhone in different sizes. It would be a push to call them revolutionary as technological concepts, even if they benefit from superior marketing and software integration. The Vision Pro is certainly an innovative product line, but it remains to be seen if it can find success, while Apple's research into other fields such as car technology has not seen them racing ahead, particularly at this point in time. Apple also has a number of risks to its business. It is reliant on iterative upgrades of its core hardware because the iPhone market is fairly well saturated, including into markets where it might have had a huge degree of exposure to future political risk. For example, China has 1.4 billion smartphone users and Apple has a 20% market share, despite China being notoriously controlling over foreign entrants into its market, as Nintendo has found many times over the years when trying to crack China. Of course, Apple is also hugely integrated with Chinese manufacturing, with 2 huge R&D centers in China, making it extremely difficult and flat out risky to step back from Chinese manufacturing. While the huge potential remains for Apple to launch a breakout product by dint of the huge amount of capital they are able to invest in research and development, the trend of other major tech companies such as Google, which is still massively reliant on the search technology it innovated a quarter century ago, suggests that these innovations are likely to be rarer than in the past. With a company as huge and diversified as Apple, innovation on this scale risks loyalty to the core brand, and so there simply becomes a lot more to lose, whereas upstart innovators can throw caution to the wind far more. Notably, Apple has focused more on the development of software and social technologies within its suite of hardware items, such as Apple Pay. Of course, Nintendo is making a similar transition with the bolstering of services such as Nintendo Switch Online and more IP-related endeavors such as theme parks, stores, and mobile phone apps. Nintendo aren't quite such a manufacturing juggernaut as Apple, who spent $10.5 billion in 2013 on custom manufacturing equipment and who, during the pandemic, were able to elbow out competitors for chips, such as Nintendo, by dint of their size and their ability to secure long-term contracts, exclusivity agreements, and prepayments, locking in prices in the face of disruption. Nintendo, who maintain a large amount of cash on hand, have some of this flexibility, but the scale is obviously far less. Still, their careful approach certainly puts them in an incredibly strong position. The risk for both companies is not that they won't continue for a long time into the future to be financially successful, but that the pace of innovation will stagnate, and despite both of their mythoses being around disruption and innovation, their approaches to the market will fundamentally become about incrementalist advancements on well-established ideas. For Nintendo, this must seem like a very tempting path, and in many respects, fans would want this. How many times in the Switch years have we heard people saying that they just want Nintendo to put out the Switch Plus, the Switch Pro, the Switch 2? We want the next Zelda, the next 3D Mario, the next Animal Crossing, and there's nothing intrinsically wrong in giving people what they want. Except, as Henry Ford is once reported to have said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have asked for a faster horse. Nintendo and Apple both risk entering the era of faster horse technologies, and while a fast horse is great, their fortunes have ultimately been made on being different. Here, though, I think Nintendo is actually in a stronger position than Apple for the longer term. While Apple's founding myth is really centered around a very American idea, the unique and individual genius of Steve Jobs, Nintendo's is centered around a culture of innovation. Whereas Apple's motto is Think Different, which is very much an instruction to its developers, Nintendo's aim to surprise and delight, while having the same basic flair, is, I think, far better because it centers not on some indefinable quality about the product, but about the specific emotional response that they are trying to generate in the audience, and which presumably they should also be able to gauge. And while it would only be financially prudent to emulate many of the facets of Apple's success in the Tim Cook era, including manufacturing efficiency, sweating the assets of the best products, and doubling down on hardware-software integration, Nintendo's dedication to sweating and developing existing technologies give it a lot more flexibility to innovate at low risk. The Vision Pro reportedly has had quite a healthy profit margin, but then again it must also have had a huge upfront development cost. But inevitably with new technologies which are low placed on the S-curve, one main method of driving early adoption is to lower prices. The DS popularized touchscreen at a low cost several years before the iPhone, while turning a profit, but it could easily have flopped. But Nintendo's reputation is not about their products being perfectly curated wonders that bring boutique quality to a wide audience. Rather, they are famous for doing absolutely off-the-wall stuff on the regular. I almost think that the release of Alamo at a time when all eyes were fixed on the prospect of a Nintendo Switch successor was worth its weight in gold to them alone as a way to offer a definitive statement. Specifically, that we're going to stay weird and stay strange and stay Nintendo. What Nintendo is doing here is actually incredibly hard, to have a culture of innovation not just represented in a single mythic founder or even a few key individuals, but distributed widely across the company, is in its very DNA, even at the same time as it expands and institutionalizes. That's hard going, and especially since the medium-term pressures both on the audience and from the financial backers, as amply evidenced by Apple's success under Tim Cook, is to focus on building the better horse. But I have to say, I hope that Nintendo continues to push itself to be that little bit different and surprising and off the wall. Do check out my video on Nintendo's China strategy up here for more information on how Nintendo is handling its entry into this market, and you can also see a playlist of some of my past financial deep dives on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching, thank you to my Patreon supporters as ever, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.